further ado, I'd like to move to introduce Michael Gomez.
Thank you, Carolyn. Just give me a second to organize myself. I'm delighted to be on your campus again. It's been a bit since I was here last time, and I want to thank Professor Stefan Robelin for his kind invitation, as well as Dr. Bayo Holsey, Chika Okoye, both of whom facilitated the arrangement, and everyone else involved in the planning. I just hope that you don't regard the invitation to prove to be a colossal mistake. I have friends and associates here, including Carolyn Brown and Kim Butler, Aban Abusia, who I understand is off to bigger and better things these days, Hussein Alido, Walter Rucker is here, Alamin Masrui, and others. My greetings to all of you. So this afternoon I wish to offer some thoughts on African history and the cognate field of African diasporic history as they relate to the process of knowledge production. In so doing, I want to explore particular facets of historical writing, particularly with respect to African people, as imbricated within the social and political and social milieu from which it proceeds. To state this differently, I endeavor to attend to historical writing with its I endeavor to attend to historical writing as its own category of subjectivity. And in so doing, I readily acknowledge my own by way of reference to a couple of progenitors who anticipate my own relationship to the field. So what better way to begin than with Paul Robeson, born in 1898 in Princeton, New Jersey, and whose father escaped from slavery in North Carolina. Although educated here at Rutgers and then Columbia School of Law, it was not until 1927, when moving with his spouse Eslanda to London, he underwent an epiphany. In an April 1955 interview in Fighting Talk, he would reveal, quote, "I discovered Africa in London, reflecting a deep immersion in the cultures and communities there." In 1934, he would write an essay entitled "I Want to Be an African," in which he reflected on the figure of the African American as, quote, "a tragic creature, a man without a nationality." That same year, 1934, Louise Thompson, who along with Houston-born Thyra Edwards, had entered into the world of radical politics and homosocial community. And they traveled to the Soviet Union, where they experienced, quote, "a euphoric sense of personal freedom from American racism." Thompson would be quoted as avowing, "Russia was the only place where I was able to forget that I was a Negro." In strikingly similar fashion, by the end of his travels to Africa and the Middle East in 1964, Malcolm X had acquired an honorific title and new name, El Hadji Omowale, a conjunction of the one who made the pilgrimage and the child has come home. As the late Manning Marable has demonstrated, Malcolm's time in Africa was certainly influential in expanding his understanding of the conjoined struggles of African people, but it was his pilgrimage to Mecca that initiated the quintessential breakthrough. As recorded in the autobiography, he would contend, "In my 39 years on this earth, the holy city of Mecca had been the first time I had ever stood before the Creator and felt like a complete human being." These are but a few examples of diasporic folks' reflections upon exiting their land of birth. Their reassessments have a visceral quality, suggesting a deep desire or impulse within the subconscious, actively rejecting incessant negation, while patiently awaiting opportunities to more fully engage processes of reevaluation and validation, confirming a resolute but perhaps inchoate perspective of interiority. The resonances between their responses, rather than formulaic, are far more representative of a common struggle, forming a sort of trope. Key to these experiences is spatial alterity, within which assumptions and purported verities could be challenged. In these instances, those spaces were in fact geographic locations, extending beyond America's cultural and political dominion, which speaks to how damaging, disorienting, and disaggregating the historical experiences of African Americans have been. Far from the celebration of a common humanity and shared dignity, the American story has largely been one of differential equations, of polarization, dehumanization, of contrast and inversion. The long struggle for freedom and equality has been accompanied by a quest for an approbation that may never be conferred. As we all appreciate, Du Bois also understood this challenge, as he was one of the first to articulate its substance. In his 1903 classic, Souls of Black Folk, he speaks of the Negro's peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. This, of course, is one of the most famous passages in all of scholarship, yet it is critical in understanding the epiphanies of Malcolm and Robeson and others. And when it comes to black women, Du Bois's double consciousness thesis must be expanded to accommodate the intersectionality of triple consciousness and beyond. Indeed, the variables of race, class, gender, and sexual orientation mean that multiple consciousness, while collective, is also individuated. Even so, there is yet something more to learn in revisiting Du Bois's original idea. To be sure, much has been said regarding double consciousness, but I've often wondered what Du Bois himself meant by the concept. For some, resolution to a formulation as enigmatic, as opaque, is found in the two-ness principle, an American and Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings. That is, the American Negro was a disjointed, fractured individual, unable to fully merge oppositional constructs. Although the relationship between multiple consciousness and two-ness is certainly there, I am less sanguine that they are immediately collapsible, that they refer to the same phenomenon. Rather, I believe Du Bois refers to a single condition that issues into and thus explains another. Allow me to further develop my hermeneutic. Careful scholar that he was, Du Bois wrote to be understood, taking time to define his terms. In this instance, he characterizes double consciousness as, quote, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. That is, the core issue of double consciousness is the mediation of the self-perspective, the acquisition of self-knowledge through mechanisms controlled by a hostile other. That is to say, the American Negro in Du Bois's analysis was in the predicament of learning about herself, her native potential, her intelligence, her beauty, her historical contributions, her social standing and value to society, and her future prospects through the prism of American racism. He was taught that as a member of a despised and degraded race, he was locked ontologically into inferiority and servility. This Western version of caste is deeply embedded in nearly every aspect of the American experience, with pedagogical tools and strategies extending well beyond the schoolhouse. Limited opportunities, differential pay scales, and constricted workspaces conveyed that message. The proscription of movement within public facilities, restaurants, courthouses, and means of transportation throughout the land of Jim Crow certainly can reinforce the lesson. The circumstances of residence and social interaction, a quartering of black people, whether at rest or in motion, engineered demographic patterns so dramatic and stark as to provide a template for South African apartheid. The arrogation of power by a few, the projection of white iconography, indeed the very imagery associated with divine unction, all attested to the sanctioning of order and futility of remonstration. In contrast, the image of the